Hi there, I hope you're well, and welcome to this webinar where I want to go into some depth on the recently published ACCA SBL Examiner's Report. In terms of what we're going to look at, I have broken things down into three separate sections. If you look at the bottom, you can see chapters, so you can look at the ones you're most interested in. But I'd recommend you go through all of it because it's really going to help you pass the exam. But in the first part, what we're going to have a look at in the first part is we're going to have a look at the key takeaways from the examiner's report and making sure that you are prepared should similar things come up, not to make those mistakes the examiner team highlights. So that's the first part. And then in the second part, what we're going to do is we're going to go into much more detail on the specific questions. We're going to talk about how the questions were poorly answered, or I'll give you an example of a poorly answered question, and I'll also give you examples of what a good answer looks like. So providing you with a clear benchmark of what you need to do in your SBL exam. So part two, detailed discussion, and then part three, because I've been looking these reports for decades, and I used to sit down with the examining team and we would talk about them. Now they're published online. But yeah, and I've reviewed many of them for the ACCA. If you look back in the old archives, I want to talk about the lessons that I have seen over 20 years, 30 years of going through examiner reports and what students don't do well. The key takeaways, the key exam advice that you need to take on board so that you can smash your SBL exam. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. So let's have a look at part one. Okay, part one. What are we going to look at in this section? The first thing we're going to look at is just to remind you why examiner reports are so important. You may not have come across them before, but examiner reports are very important, and I will explain in more detail in a moment. The key messages that the examiner has sent us that he expects us to take on board, we'll talk about that. And then how you can use the recent publication of this report to really maximize your chances of success in your ACCA SBL exam. We're going to look at that. And I've got a little task for you to do. That will all be revealed. But please take my advice. Yeah, if you take my advice, you pass the exam. It is as simple as that. So why do exam reports matter? What are they? How are they formed? The examiner reports are a summation of everything the examining and marking team see whilst reviewing the script from the relevant exam. So what did students do well? What didn't they do so well? And your examiner is trying to help you by giving you feedback on what they don't like and what they would like you to do better next time. So in a world where everyone's obsessed with exam tips, the examiner reports are the best set of tips that you will ever get. If students are not performing well in something, that area will get asked again and again until students prove to the examining team they can handle it okay. So that's why examiner reports matter. Yeah. And you definitely need to take on board all the tips I'm giving in this webinar. What I would describe them almost as would be the voice of the examining team. And there's no better people to give you guidance on what to do in your exam than the examining team. So listen up carefully. So in terms of the messages that we can take away from the recent report, the first thing that the examiner talked about was people did not answer the question which was asked. There's a reason that happens sometimes. I'll explain in a moment. The second thing that the examiner wasn't happy about was people not utilizing information enough. The third thing the examining team wasn't happy about was that people did not apply in a sufficient amount. The answers also lacked depth and, oh my goodness, we should not be committing this, but many students do, copying and pasting of provided material. This is a workplace exam. Imagine doing that at work. Anyway, let's deal with each of them in turn. So failing to answer the question. What you have to remember here is in an exam situation, it's stressful. When we're stressed, we produce cortisol. Okay. cortisol does funny things with our brains. It's what happens in exams. Yep, but forewarned is forearmed. And because of this cortisol, we get tunnel vision, we see questions we want to see. There's a way to stop our brains doing that. And it is this. We see the task, we read it once. We then read it a second time. We then, I would suggest the word processing area, title up plan, do a brainstorm, do a mark focus, do a mini little plan of what you're going to do to answer this task. And then before you jump in, read it a third time. Do that, you'll do fantastic. Don't do that, and you may go down the wrong road completely and get 0 marks. So students sometimes say, oh, I haven't got time to do that. Okay, if you haven't got time to do that, you've got time to get 0 marks. Yeah, 0 marks. So please do that. That will help you. What else? People not utilizing the information. There's no excuse for this, but it's all about the context, your answer. So this particular exam was a hairdressing salon. You need to put everything in the context of hairdressing. What you can use is the pre-scene material to help you. Yep. There's lots there. When reading the pre-scene, you should be thinking about the industry, thinking about any terminology to get your brain prepared to apply situations in the exam to hairdressing. Okay. Insufficient application. Okay. This would get better with practice. I think the key thing here is to be practicing mocks and getting feedback to mocks so that someone who's an expert can tell you that regurgitation is not acceptable and you're not actually applying your answer sufficiently. I'll show you a bit more of that in part 2. Okay. So in part 2 of this, we'll go into a bit more detail. My key advice here would be to get you to try to picture it. Yeah. So what I mean, visualize what's going on, what's happening. And again here, the pre-scene reading material is going to be of value to you. So pre-scene is really important. If you want to know more about the pre-scene, I've recorded a video for the ACCA on it. You can find it on my YouTube channel. If you can't find it, just email me and I'll send you a link. Copying and pasting. This is a terrible crime students commit. Think about what the SBL exam is. It's a workplace-based applied exam where you are advising a strategic leader. So your boss gives you some information to read, and what you do is photocopy it and then send that back to your boss. Your boss knows that. He gave you the information. So please do not copy and paste and use your own words. ACCA examining team often use a word which is synthesis. And what this means is we take information, random information from exhibits, from pre-scene, we put it together and then we translate it our way. That's how you get marks. Please behave that way. Yep. So they're the key takeaways that I want you to take on board. I mentioned how can we take full advantage of the 2026 examiner's report. Hopefully you are aware that the exam which the report is based on is available for you to access on the IAssess platform. Do you know what the IAssess platform is? I hope you do, because that is a massive way of you understanding what your exam will be like. The IAssess platform is not Word. It is not Excel. Yep. But it's the platform which you will be doing your exam on. So I suggest before you look at part 2 and part 3, you download the exam that is there for you. You do it to time. You review your answers against the suggested answers, and then you can also review it against the examiner's report, because this is a massively detailed marking scheme that you can take advantage of, and you can see what other students did well and not so well. So take the opportunity to maximize your chances of passing. Okay? All right. So when I see you in part 2, you will have spent a considerable amount of time, 3¼ hours, on the IAssess platform doing the exam that is available for you to download. I hope so. I'll see you in part 2. Thank you very much. Hi there, and welcome to part 2 of the SBL 2026 Examiner Report Review. In this area, we are going to go into a little bit more detail on the questions that were given in the June 2026 exam, which you've just done a mock on the ACCA Assess platform. I hope you have. We're going to pick on the key messages that the examining team are sending to make sure that you take action. And I'm going to give you some examples of what a good answer looks like and what a bad answer looks like, so you can understand what is required. But just one more question. How was the mock? Did you have a go? I'll leave it to you. But as I said in part one, to do that mock under time is an invaluable experience to help you pass the exam. And if you don't have the benefit of getting mocks marked like my students do by actual SBL markers, there is a lot of information by the examining team in that examiner's report on what students did well, and much better than most questions. So valuable to do it, but I'll leave it up to you. So in terms of the questions from that mock that you did, here is question 1A, which asks us to prepare a report for the financial director, which assesses the performance of DKK in the last 12 months in the context of the company's strategic objectives, explaining the potential reasons for and implications of results. So you were given an exhibit in the exam. You can see that if you've downloaded it, and you were asked the questions. Personally, I would write this down so I don't do what I mentioned in part one, where we sometimes misread the question. So to stop me misreading the question in case my brain is full of cortisol, I write it down. What do we have here? We have a report. We have to comment in the context of the company's strategic objectives. We're asked to assess performance. We are asked to explain the reasons for and implications of the results. And for doing that, we're going to get 18 marks. Okay, so I think it's really useful to write it down just in case we miss anything out. With our tunnel vision, with our cortisol, hey, we might miss out strategic objectives. So let's think, what are the strategic objectives? It asks for performance in the context of strategic objectives. Before we go on to that, sometimes people ask me for a pro forma on a report. There isn't one way of doing a report because different companies will do reports different ways, but you should be looking at to from date, maybe an intro, maybe a conclusion, but be careful doing elaborate report writing, because if there are any marks for intros and conclusions, there's 1 or 2 maximum. So don't waste too much time on it. But the key thing that was going to drive our answer was the strategic objectives. So if these were given in you can see them, have a look. But just for the purposes of explanation here, say there were a percentage increase in revenue and there was a percentage increase in staff satisfaction. So therefore it was important that your evaluation linked back to these. The report shows many students did not link back to these, which meant many students did not answer the question which was asked. Had we written it down like I suggested you do, that could have made your life easier. So what would a poor answer look like? Well, a poor answer would look something like this. It would just say, given a subheading, great, that's a good presentational style. During the 12 months, the number of hairdressers employed dropped by 15% and the number of hairdressers assistants dropped by 10. Big deal. It actually gives you those figures in the exhibit. As your strategic leader asking for advice, I can read those figures. What value have you added? You haven't added anything yet. You haven't even done a calculation. You've just regurgitated what is in the exhibit. No marks. So what would a better answer look like? Well, it might just contextualize things a bit. It might say during the 12 months, the number of hairdressers employed dropped by 15%. And so it gives some context. But then what about the why? What about the so what? Well, the so what, the why, this is likely to have put pressure on the hairdressing team to work harder to fulfill the demand with a lower number of hairdressers and assistants. So what? Well, these increased work pressures could make staff rush more and spend less time with their clients. Okay, that's definitely worth a mark. Yep. How could we get even more marks? Well, you'll see that the answer we just did there did nothing about strategic objectives. So let's answer something with strategic objectives. So we do the stuff in pink, and then in blue, the better answer says this is likely for staff to feel less happy in their jobs and cause a fall in the average staff satisfaction, which is a key strategic objective. So we have linked strategic objectives. One point, if you make a minor typo, if you make a spelling error, you will not get marks deducted. Your examiner says time and time again that SBL is not an examination of English eloquence. I have prize winners who didn't speak English 4 or 5 years before they even took the exam, and you can find out about those. So if you're a bit worried about your English, don't worry about it. But what we have here is a so what, a why, and a link to the strategic objectives. Do that. That's a great answer. Okay, what did poor answers say? They just said things went up, things went down, number of training hours declined. No reflection of the marks. So there were a certain amount of marks we had to go for. There was nothing about strategic objectives. They were all poor answers. You can look at more about that in the report. Okay, question 1B asked us to do a report which evaluates the consultant's proposed remuneration scheme, considering its effects on achieving DKK's strategic objectives and any changes. And also our professional skills marks here were for commercial acumen. So you had to demonstrate you were thinking like a commercial accountant, 16 marks. So quick summation again, which is what I would do. It asks us to do a report. So again, to, from, date, but don't over elaborate things. It asks us to evaluate. So we're giving both sides. The verb there is evaluate. It's asking us to talk about it in the context of strategic objectives again. So we need to make sure we do that. And we were also asked to suggest changes. And for all of that, we get 18 marks. Okay, so not too bad, but a few things, if we were stressed, filled with cortisol, we might miss out. But because we wrote it, I'd recommend you write it in the word processing section of your answer to say this is a plan. And yeah, that's what I'd do. So a poor answer would say a bonus based on profits may lead to managers falsifying profits to get bonuses. Well, this is true that sometimes management, the agency issue might be management overinflate their bonuses and stuff. But this is just something picked out of nowhere. This has no context to anything that was said in both the pre-scene and both the exhibits. So that's not going to get any marks at all because there's no evidence anywhere that managers are falsifying profits. So yeah, there's a few answers like that, no marks. What about saying this? A bonus based on profits may lead to too much of a focus on the financial aspects. Such an approach may lead to short-termism and underinvestment in long-term investments such as training and investment in R&D, which could damage long-term profitability of DKK. Yeah, it's definitely worth a mark. Could we do even better and definitely get 2 marks? Well, I think if we look at what we did here, would be saying if we just had a bonus that just looked at, I've purposely left a typo, and again, no minus marks for that. But if we did a bonus which just looked at profitability, it basically might impact on the achievement of DKK's overall strategic objectives, as focus on profits might lead to less investment in staff, leading to a decline in staff satisfaction. Staff satisfaction was a strategic objective. Yep. So something we need to do. We've done the so what, we've linked it to strategic objectives. And this is just an example of one of the points that we could give. But that's what I want you to be doing in the exam. And I want you to be doing enough that reflects the marks that are available. Okay, good. Let's then have a look at question 2A. Here again, a report for the CEO. It evaluates financial and strategic benefits of and problems with the 2 proposed investments and recommend which, if either, should be chosen. We were given professional skills for evaluation. So what happened here? Again, there was an exhibit. In the exhibit, there was information on, I think, setting up salons in the gyms, and the other one was to acquire another gym chain, so an acquisition. Okay, what are we looking at? Well, we're looking at the fact that it's a report. We're looking at the fact that we're asked to evaluate, so give both sides. It's financial and strategic objectives. It's the benefits and problems. Did you deal with benefits and problems? And for that, we get 20 marks. So there's two things in terms of marking schemes. When it's a 20-mark answer, it's not going to be cut down 10 marks, 10 marks. What the marking schemes normally do would be to say for maybe investment of hairdressers and gyms up to 12 marks. And then for maybe the acquisition up to 12 marks, maximum of 20 marks in total. So there's a bit of flexibility in marking there if you weren't aware of that. That's what happens in real exams. Okay, so what would we be doing? Well, as I said in part one, I'd encourage you to do a brainstorm, a mark focus. So I'd do a brainstorm of benefits. I'd do a brainstorm of problems. If I was stuck, I would help myself on evaluation. If you look back at my webinar that looks at the June exam, I do a webinar right after the June exam comes out. And I mentioned a little bit about what we did in the mock, and we did do this in the pre-scene mock. But on evaluation, is it suitable? Is it feasible? Is it acceptable? Have a look at that video because it goes into quite a lot of detail. Have we looked at financial? Have we looked at strategic? Have we talked about benefits, problems? And did we make a recommendation? It asked us to make a recommendation. Many students didn't. Okay. So what would a poor answer look like? Well, a poor answer would just state nothing with drawing any conclusion. They did a subheading. So this is just a point of investment in the salons and gyms. It might be difficult to recruit a hairdresser to staff the gym. Okay. Are you going to give any evidence for that? Can you just explain your thought process? Because if you can't, I'm not really going to give you a mark for that. So what would a better answer look like? Well, it would explain the context. Currently, there's a shortage of qualified hairdressers in K-Land. So that's where DKK is. And this might make it difficult to staff the proposed new salons with hairdressers of the required standard. I'll give you a mark for that. Okay. What would a better answer look like? Well, then I would follow through with a so what and a why. And I would say, as a result, a customer might not receive the services to the high standards they are currently delivered by DKK. So what? Well, that's likely to have a detrimental effect on DKK's brand and its reputation. Good answer, 2 marks for an answer of that standard. Again, a lot of people get told you get 2 marks an answer. You do if you do an answer like that, but they don't just give you 2 marks. You need to, first of all, synthesize things your way for a mark. And then if you can follow through with a good so what and a why, like I've done there, that will get you 2 marks, but only if you do that. Okay? All right. Let's then look at 2B. In 2B, we're asked to prepare briefing notes to the CEO, which assesses the different change leadership styles that the CEO could adopt when implementing his proposals. Recommend which leadership style will be most appropriate to ensure that DKK salon managers support. And also we were asked here to show communication skills, so good use of communication. If this was a slide question and it asked for communication skills and you didn't do slides, you would lose all of the communication marks. So watch out for that. But I've got other videos on slides and what to include and etc. So you can find those on my YouTube channel. Okay, so what would the approach be here? Well, we're asked to do briefing notes. Just acknowledge the request. Title briefing notes to from date. That will do. It's asking about a change, not change. It's asking about a change in leadership styles. Okay. But some people got mixed up on that. You're asked to make a recommendation. Make sure you do that. And for that, you're going to get 10 marks. Okay. So what would a poor answer look like? Well, you'd see some poor answers like this. When changing, it's really important to follow Lewin's 3-step model of change. And they need to unfreeze, change, refreeze. Can you imagine doing that in the workplace? That's what you've always got to come back to. You are someone advising people in the workplace. If you do something like that, people are thinking you're a bit weird. Anyway, that's not what we do. It was not about change. It was about leadership. So I would say a good answer would maybe, so under the subtitle of different leadership styles, we could address autocratic leadership style. And we do that as a subheading. We could have demonstrated a similar point on democratic or laissez-faire, but we need to do it in the context of the question. So we explain an autocratic leadership style would involve senior management giving clear direction on what they want to happen without any discussion with staff. This approach is similar to what existing DKK staff have experienced so far, and therefore is likely to be met with little resistance. However, it could lead to staff dissatisfaction, as staff won't feel empowered. Nice answer. Yep, nice answer. What about 3A? Well, 3A was the last question, asked us for an email. Oh, what does an email look like? Well, I'm sure you have all done an email. So just title email to from date. Assess the threats to the internal auditor's independence and explain how they are mitigated. Skepticism here. So just to summarize, the approach, it's an email, it's assess the threat, it is suggesting mitigation, it is 16 marks. This should have been a fairly easy, and you had to show skepticism, but this should have been fairly easy. If you were one of my students, I would give you lots of mnemonics in the area of internal audit. We talk about advocacy. When an audit promotes a client's position, their objectivity could be compromised, self-interest, they could have financial interests in things, self-review, looking at their own work, they might be intimidated, they might be too familiar, close with the family and all of that. We shouldn't be doing that. You might also, if you're on, I would have definitely, this is part of my course, a reference to all relevant articles. There's a full article. If you're looking at this from a revision perspective, please read the technical articles I recommend you to read. This, if you read it, would help you answer this question perfectly. So there was that. I also make my students understand things through mind maps. So if you've my student and you've been through a mind map, the answers to this question are all in my mind map. Mind maps are a great way of helping summarize SBL. SBL is about understanding the big picture. A mind map gives you the big picture. And pretty much for all syllabus areas, I would create mind maps. And I would actually ask students not just to use mind maps, but having looked at my mind maps, create their own mind maps. Very powerful learning tool. So what approach would we do here? Well, this is just an example of maybe a 2-mark point, a mitigation strategy to the problems of the internal auditor being intimidated would be establish an audit committee. So what's that? Explain. Well, they need to establish an audit committee staffed by independent expert staff to whom the internal audit department is to report. So what? Well, this would ensure that the internal CFO or any other internal interested party has no ability to influence the behavior of the internal audit department, and it retains its independence. So there is a snippet of a style of answer I would like to see. You obviously need to do many of those to get 60-70% of the marks minimum, just in case one of your points isn't any good. That's how you pass SBL. But the key thing of passing SBL, I would suggest to you, is you make sure you read the examiner's report. Okay? It's 20 odd pages long. I won't pick it up on my desk. Please read it. And I would suggest that you digest it thoroughly. Okay? So that brings part 2 of this webinar to an end. In part 3, I'm going to bring information from previous examiner reports as well as this examiner report and highlight to you key techniques that you need to adopt so that you can smash your SBL exam and get as many marks as possible. So I'll see you in part 3, and thanks for listening so far. Hi there, and welcome to part 3, where I want to give you some key exam advice based on what we've said in part 1 and part 2, just to make sure that you give the best possible version of yourself in the exam. So what we're going to look at in part 3, how do we deal with time management? I'm going to look at techniques and show you how important time management is and how it can really cost you whether you get a pass or fail if you don't manage it correctly. I'm then going to talk about how we approach exam tasks, just to remind you what to do there. And then finally, I'm going to look at how we add most value to points. So more of a summation of what we have touched on in part 1 and part 2. So that's what we're going to do. So let's get started. So if I look at time management really important. First thing we need to work out is the kind of rubric which we use to manage our time. So we need to ask ourselves, how many minutes does the exam have? Obviously, it's 3 hours and 15 minutes. That's 195 minutes. How long are we going to spend reading and planning? We probably have to fine tune this by practicing mocks on the ACCA ISS platform, but let's say about 35 minutes in total reading and planning. So if we take that off our 195 minutes, that gives us 160 minutes. The exam includes 20 professional marks. These professional skills marks take no time to acquire, so therefore we've got 160 minutes, and we're dividing it by the 80 technical marks. Okay, pretty simple equation, that one, which gives us about 2 minutes per mark. So if a question was an 8-mark question, that is 16 minutes. Yeah, just to make sure I stick to those 16 minutes though, when I'm in an exam, I would be writing start and finish time. Yep, just so that I finish at the appropriate time. Remember also that the exam ticks down rather than ticks up. Yeah, you just need to make sure you do that correctly. So there's your budget. That's how we deal with it. What I want to show you now is what a lot of students do in the real exam and how they can really damage their passing chances. So if we say an exam has 3 tasks, and for argument's sake, let's say these tasks are spread equally, what an ideal exam should be when managing our time, we start task 1, and then at the time when it's over, we start task 2, and then our finish time, we start task 3, and hopefully we do that all correctly. One thing I want to draw your attention to here, though, is the marks scored per minute. And what you should realize is in an exam, the first 50% of the marks are the easiest to get. After that, they become progressively more difficult. Yep. So what you need to make sure that you do is put yourself in a position to get the first 50% of task 1, the first 50% of task 2, and the first 50% of task 3. That's unfortunately not what everybody does, and I'll show you what some students will do, and unfortunately it goes a little bit like this. They start task 1, but they can say a little bit more. Yeah, I can get more marks here. So instead of finishing at the time that the budget says, we go and do a little bit more. Yep, but when we're doing a little bit more at this stage here, you got to realize that the mark per minute score which you're getting is not that great, but that's what people do. So we finish task 1 late, we then start task 2 late, and yeah, we're doing okay on it, but actually I can say a little bit more. So again, we say a little bit more, which is fine. Unfortunately, we are now finishing task 2 late and starting task 3 very late, and we're hardly going to put ourselves in a position to get anywhere close to the first 50%, the easy marks. The first 50% are always the easy marks. So sadly, what happens? What happens is we stop. Our exam stops, and we give quite a poor account of ourselves for task 3. So what? We did well in task 1, we did well in task 2. Hopefully we will pass. Sadly, it doesn't really work like that, and this is typically what would happen. So the marks gained on task 1 weren't bad. You're getting nearly 70% of the marks in task 1, and maybe you get 21 out of 33. So that's okay. On task 2, yes, again, we get well over 50%, and we get 19 out of 33. That's good. So we now have a collective number of score of about 40. How many marks do we get for task 3? We didn't really do much. We didn't give ourselves the opportunity to get those easy 50%, and we score a 4 out of 33. So what happens? what happens is we get 44 out of 100. We could have got better had we managed our time. The extra green bits there that we spent on task 1 and task 3, we're not gaining as many marks, so the result is a fail. Yep. So please manage your time. Make sure that time facilitates you to get the first 50%. If you do that, happy days. Okay. All right. How then do we deal with task requirements? I have mentioned this, but just to remind you again, in an exam, you're going to have a little bit of stress. Okay. That stress is going to mess with your mind. And as we've said before, stress is a good thing, but it needs to be managed. We need to appreciate that our brain might get a bit mashed. We therefore need to have a strategy. And that strategy you might remember from earlier, to make sure we answer the task that is actually asked. We read the requirements once, we read the requirements a second time, we then do a brainstorm, a mark focus, so the points we make are reflective of the marks, and that helps us create a plan. But before we jump in, we read it a third time and then we jump in, and we do this exercise on the actual exam paper word processing area, and that can often facilitate us with some subheadings that we can use in our plan to our real answer. Yeah, so that is the key thing to make sure we focus on the task that is asked, which many people don't. You will see what I did in part 2, how I wrote down it was a report. They were asking us to look at it in the context of strategic objectives, etc., etc. That is important. And also, what we use is synthesis. So we take the information and we translate it in our language, our way, because we know there are no marks for brain dumping of theory, which sadly many students do. With regards to theory itself, the theory is a very good way of catalyzing some ideas. Yeah, so you can structure your answers, but dumping the theory is going to get no marks whatsoever. Yep. The other important thing we would have seen when we were in part 2 is often when you look at the professional skills marks, it doesn't just say professional skills marks for skepticism or communication or whatever. It gives you quite a good clue on how you're going to structure your answer. And if you follow that structure, that will enable you to get maximum marks. Yep. And yeah, in terms of the marks, those marks provide a context to how much you actually say. How many points do you give? I'd suggest maybe go for 70% minimum in case a couple of your points are dodgy. Don't expect that you're going to get 2 marks a point. I hear these lecturers saying, oh, you get 2 marks a point. You do if you develop your points like I showed you in part 2, but it's not a given. It's not even a given for 1 point unless you synthesize the information. If you just brain dump or restate facts, 0 marks. Yep. Okay, so that's important. The other thing in terms of tasks is how do we add value? When we looked at tasks in the detailed focus in part 2, we adopted a so what, a why, what is the consequence of what I've just said. That helped us just make the point a better point for which we would get more marks. Yeah, and I was encouraging you to try visualize, to picture it. You should be thinking, what is going on here? What is the story? What's the information here in the context of hairdressing? Yeah, so if you do all of that, you're going to do absolutely fantastic. Remember, you are given permission to express your own commercial viewpoint in SBL. It's not a brain dumping of theory. It is asking you for an opinion. You would probably happily give that opinion in the workplace. But unfortunately, in the exam, I see students who say, oh, I can't say that because it's not theory. You can if it's relevant. The marking scheme is very broad on SBL. So follow all this advice and you're going to do fantastic. Let me now just recap what we have learned and what you need to do so you do well in SBL. Okay, pre-scene, when it comes out, understand it. It provides context Don't go crazy about it, but understand the industry, understand any terminology. I will always do a review of the pre-scene, so look that up. Yeah. When a task appears, who are you? Who are you talking to? What is the verb? What is the professional skills marks? How many marks in technical terms are being awarded? Yep. And that's what I would do. I would always read the tasks before the exhibits, because that then gives the exhibits context. And I would often make a little note: exhibit 1 and 2 relate to task 1, exhibit 3 relates to task 2, and so on. And remember, the exhibits are not exhibit 1, task 1. It doesn't work like that always, so you can't rely on it. Professional skills requirements, as I've said, often give a great structured guide to what you're going to say. And if you copy and paste, you're not taking any notice of what I've said, you won't get any marks for that. But as I say, use synthesis to reinterpret your way. Yep. So do those things, you'll be fine. What else? Always try and follow up with a so what, a why. What is the consequence of what I've just said? Don't just come up with things like, I think in part 2, I gave a bad answer where they just said, oh, the directors will be falsifying their bonuses. Unless there's evidence for that, you can't just say random things like that. You'll get no marks. And unfortunately, students do. The markers, as I've said, only mark one part of the exam, one task. They mark it hundreds of times. They're very aware of what is relevant to that question. So if you're repeating points, it's very obvious to the marker. So please don't do that. Stress is a natural thing. Stress actually helps us perform better. So if you're getting stressed, that's a good thing. It's helping me perform better. But we do need to have in our toolbox some techniques that'll help us just calm ourselves down, mindfulness, box breathing, read it once, read it twice, etc. Make sure you do that. And look at the whole self. Sleep is a time where our brains consolidate all the information, tidy everything up, put it into the correct drawers to help us process all this stuff. Most of our brain is water, so we need to make sure we are hydrated. But yeah, that's what we need. That's what we're going to do. Do all of those things and you'll be absolutely fine. So thank you very much. I hope what I have said has been useful. It is based on decades, 30 years probably, of sitting in examiners' meetings, marking many students' scripts, understanding what students don't do well and helping them change and adopt the techniques. If you have any questions, just feel free to WhatsApp me. That's how I deal with all my students. If you've got any questions, WhatsApp me. There's lots of decent information on my website. You also look at my YouTube channel where I've got links to official ACCA stuff. I've got lots of other useful information which is going to help you pass the exam. Okay? Treat your exam. It's a project management exercise in mark acquisition. We've got timing, we've got mark focus, we're using synthesis. Follow all the tips I've given over these 3 sections and you'll do absolutely fine. Thank you for listening. All the best.